What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. Today we are porting our 317 cylinder heads for the 6-liter going into the blue crew cab. These are the factory heads that we took off of the 2006 2500 HD. I'll put a link to that build up here in the corner. The reason we took these heads off is we put a set of 862s on. The 862s have a smaller combustion chamber, so it effectively raises the compression ratio just a little bit in that engine. Now, the engine that I'm putting into the blue crew cab, it was an iron-headed engine, and I mean, there's just no reason to use those iron heads, especially because I had these nice 317s sitting on the shelf. They only have about 90,000 miles on them, so I'm not going to bother lapping the valves or anything on these. I am going to be installing a higher lift capable valve springs to handle our sloppy stage 2 camshaft and the lift it generates, and new valve seals just because I'm going to have the springs off, so I might as well spend the $8 and put new valve seals on and not worry about it. And we're going to do a mild port job in these heads. I want to blow as much boost into this engine as I can, and the better your heads flow, the more efficient your engine's going to be, whether it's boosted or naturally aspirated. So the first step here is going to be get everything torn off, and then I'm going to mark all of the valves so I can put them back where they came from. That way I don't have to relap them and reseat them into the valve seats. So yeah, let's just get after it and get these heads taken apart. Disassembled. Let me bring you in close and show you what we actually want to do to these heads. LS cylinder heads, 317s, 823s, 706s. I mean, they're all good flowing heads right from the factory. There's really not a lot that you need or even can do to them to make them flow better. But there are a few small little tweaks that you can make that help. So we're looking down into the head here. If you've never done porting before, I really recommend having yourself a nice bright light of some kind, whether that's a flashlight, a work light, something that you can shine through the port to help you really see what you're doing. Now this is the intake port. Now inside of here, you can see we've got our valve bore right there in the center of the screen. And then just to the left of that, you can see that little bit of a shoulder. Kind of looks like a bend off to the left. We're going to try to smooth that out. What we want to try to do is this little part right here on this side. We want to try to make it look as similar as possible to this side. When air is coming from the intake down into the engine, it's going to run mostly across the top of the port. And air likes nice smooth pathways. It likes to be shown where to go. So by having this little lip here with an overhang, it causes turbulence right here in this flat spot. And this is kind of one of the worst places to have turbulence. We want all this airflow to be as smooth as possible right down towards the back of the valve and into the combustion chamber. So the first thing we're going to do is round out this side of the intake port and make it as similar as possible to this side. So now we're looking into the exhaust port. Now remember, the exhaust gas is going the opposite direction. So instead of flowing down into the combustion chamber towards us, the piston is literally driving that air out of this port. And same thing, air still is going to follow the top of that port, and it wants to take as smooth a pathway as possible. But right here, around the valve bore, again, we've got this big flat shoulder, and that causes turbulence. It makes the air not want to flow. So on the exhaust ports, we're going to just blend this shoulder in, try to make it as smooth a transition as possible all the way to the valve guide so that air is able to follow a nice smooth flow pathway. Okay, so now we're looking from the intake manifold side of the intake port. You can see for the most part, it's very flat, it's very consistent, and we want to follow the line of sight. Air is going to go in as straight and direct a path as possible. So if we line up as best we can, you can see that there's really no obstruction. There's really nothing in the way of our flow. So we really don't need to do anything from this side of the port. The bottom of the port, there's really no sense in doing much in the bottom of the port. So we don't need to mess with those. But if we find any of those rough spots, those those places where the mold had a deformity or defective spot in it on the top of the port, we're going to try to get those as smooth as possible. All right, and last but not least, the exhaust port. Now you can see here, the exhaust port in these heads, in my opinion, is really nice. We're going to smooth out the transition around the valve guide just a little bit, like I said earlier. And if we find any rough spots, any casting flash, anything like that, we'll smooth those off. But for the most part, the exhaust ports in these heads are really, really nice. There's not a lot you can do to improve them or change them. So we're really not going to mess with these from the port side unless we see some flashing that needs to be taken off. All right, as far as tools, you don't need any crazy, fancy, special tools in order to do this, okay? I have a die grinder. I have a couple different die grinder burrs. Really, for this job, the only burr you need are the little Christmas tree shaped burrs. I like these because you're less likely to gouge or cut or make a real deep groove or a harsh angle somewhere. And they're still gonna fit into most of the curves and radiuses you need to cut. A ball burr is nice also, but not necessary. You don't need special aluminum cutting burrs. If you have them, great, use them. If not, steel cutting burrs work just fine. Just spray them with a little WD-40 or light oil before you start cutting, and every time you stop to check and see what you're doing. The aluminum will stick into this burr unless you spray it with that light oil. The light oil will help it release, and that way your burr doesn't get clogged up. Now the most important thing, safety glasses. In my case, safety goggles. I prefer goggles over glasses. And really, if you're going to be at this for a while like we are, get yourself some hearing protection or some headphones to listen to some music or something, because it's kind of monotonous and it's not super exciting. So I'm going to get my safety gear on and get started on these things. I'll try to give you guys as good a view, as good an angle as I can. We've got the first head done. You can see our intake runner here. We're nice and smooth transition now. We took down that square part quite a bit. Made it a much more smooth, gradual curves and blended that valve guide support against the valve guide. The exhaust, we did more or less the same thing. We blended the valve guide support right up against the valve guide, made a nice smooth transition down into the neck of the port. We also smoothed the back a little bit. There's a little hump in the back of the exhaust port from the machining process, so we smoothed that down as well. Check the tops of the intake and exhaust runners. Didn't see any casting flash or deformities or anything like that. Not really surprised, they're pretty unusual. But this head is ready. So let's do the second one. You've seen the process now, so I'll get the second one done and then we'll get these heads put back together. All right, we've got both cylinder heads ported out, cleaned up, all the metal shavings wiped away. So now we can put them back together. The first thing you do is get your valve seals installed. Valve seals are super easy. They look like a little hat, and all that hat does is press down over top of the valve guide. So take your little seal, push it on. That's all there is to it, okay? Wash, rinse, repeat for all 8 valves. Once your valve seals are installed, then you can put your actual valves back in. I've done a video on installing valves before, so I'm not going to go into a detail. There's a link to the video right up here. You can watch that. It shows the detail of, installing the valves, installing your valve springs, and how to get that done. For sake of time, I'm going to try to hurry up and get these put back together so we can actually get the heads bolted back onto the rest of the engine tonight. So I got halfway through this head and realized I hadn't put the valve seals on. So I have to pull these 4 valves back out to put the valve seals in. All right, both heads are ready to go. I've got my head gaskets over on the table. Well, let's get the heads on this engine so this thing is sealed up, and then I can basically just leave it until my paint and my cleaning stuff gets here. In case you're wondering, I found Elgin springs with the same specs at a better price this time, and they are part number RV9951S. It's a pack of 4. I've used pack racing springs in the past and haven't had an issue with them, but I just found these Elgin springs at a better price this time, so figured I would give them a shot and see how they do. So let's get these heads on the engine. So my heads are ready to go. I've got new head gaskets for this since the old ones were composite. Those are not reusable. I like to give the head surface a little wipe off, or sorry, the block surface a little wipe off first. Make sure there's no little pieces of gunk or anything like that stuck on there anywhere. I need to get my dowel pins put back in place. 2 little circular dowel pins. There's no special procedure to put these in. Just set them in, give them a little tap. There we go. I've got my new head gasket here. These are LS7 gaskets. They're marked front. You stick them on. Now, I like to give mine just a little spritz of copper spray before I put them on there. That's enough. I'm not trying to change the color of the gasket or completely coat it. I just want enough to make it tacky. Set that in place. Should sit right on the dowel pins. Then I can take my cylinder head, wipe off the surface of my cylinder head. Head on also. All right, so now I'll get all my other head bolts in, and then we'll go through the torque sequence. So on these head bolts, I am reusing the stock head bolts. I've reused head bolts so far on 4 different engines and not had an issue with any of them. And 2 of them are turbocharged. So I have all the confidence in reusing the stock torque-heeled head bolts. I put a little bit of liquid Teflon on the threads. I put a little dab. If I have oil, I use oil. I have this leftover Ultra Torque assembly lube from the rod bolts, so I'm going to use that on the bottom of the heads. And then you stick them in, get them all started before you tighten any, and then torque them down following the factory torque procedure. So now we just torque them down. You can find the torque specs and the sequence online, readily available, easily accessed information. So now I'm just gonna get this one torqued down, then we'll do the same process on the other side. I'm not going to put my rocker arms and push rods in yet because I want all the valves to stay closed. It also reminded me that I need to order a set of spark plugs for this thing. But I'm going to stick the valve covers on, the steam passages and plugs on, and then that's going to be it until I can get this thing cleaned up and painted. Alright everybody, well that's it for this video. I'm going to call it a night. It's getting late. I really appreciate every one of you that watch. I hope you learned something. I hope you found it helpful. I really appreciate everybody that has subscribed. Thank you so much for doing that. And until the next video, take care.